must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.
This is Diaspora Dispatches, where I get to bring you the news making headlines across the continent of Africa this afternoon. And we're coming to you all the way from Kenya's capital here in Nairobi. My name is Miriam Ogutu. And let's just get into it. And we start with the Central African Republic, where Pope Francis has urged the people of Central African Republic to refrain from violence after the deeply troubled country staged disputed elections. 10 opposition candidates called on Tuesday for the cancellation of the December 27th vote that saw the re-election of President Faustin Todare in the mineral-rich nation. In a joint statement, they said the polls for president and parliament had been littered with numerous irregularities and called for a straightforward annulment. They said also about 695,000 of the 1.8 million registered voters were unable to cast their ballots, equivalent of the turnout of 37% rather than the 76% reported by the Electoral Commission. And then we head over to the Democratic Republic of Congo, and China has granted some debt relief to the Democratic Republic of Congo to help it overcome economic fallout from the coronavirus pandemic. The Congolese foreign minister said on Wednesday, as a result, the DRC will not have to repay its interest-free loans from China that matured at the end of 2020. The ministry did not say how much this amounted to. We head over to Somalia, and the official in charge of Somalia's prisons has survived an explosion targeting his convoy in the capital, Mogadishu. General Mohammed Abdi Harman and other senior government officials who were traveling with him escaped unhurt. Death tolls from attacks like this are increasingly secretive in Somalia as the country approaches next month's elections, but a government spokesperson confirmed 2 soldiers were killed. What is not clear is the number of residents who were at the scene when the explosion happened, although there are believed to be many severely injured. This blast is just the latest to target members of the federal government. Earlier this week, Somalia's police spokesperson Sadiq Adan Ali Dodishe survived a similar attack, and no group has yet to claim responsibility for either explosion, but the jihadist group Al-Shabaab are suspected of being behind both attacks. We are still in matters related to Somalia, and Somali American Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is planning to initiate a process of impeachment of the U.S. President Donald Trump after his supporters stormed the Capitol building, the seat of the country's legislature. Hundreds of Mr. Trump supporters breached security barriers and entered the Capitol after attending his rally on Wednesday. The U.S. president told his supporters to protest against the certification of President-elect Joe Biden, with falsely claiming that there were widespread fraud in November election. At least 4 people were killed, with several injured during the violent protest. U.S. media have reported and also confirmed, the government has confirmed. And we go on to Ghana, where Ghana's newly elected members of parliament engaged in a scuffle on Wednesday night following a disagreement on the election of the new speaker. The speaker was to be elected by secret ballot, but MPs from the ruling New Patriotic Party kept displaying their marked ballot papers to the displeasure of opposition members of parliament. At some point, a ruling party MP snatched the ballot papers while voting was still underway, sparking a confrontation. Armed police and troops temporarily stormed into the chambers to restore calm. Both the opposition and the ruling party have 137 members of parliament each, plus there is 1 independent MP. Now, a court had issued an order barring the opposition MP from voting for the speaker pending the determination of a challenge on his election, but he was somehow allowed to cast a vote. The opposition has described last December's general election as flawed and has filed a challenge at the Supreme Court seeking annulment of the presidential election. And we head over to South Africa, where South Africa has reached a grim milestone on Wednesday by reporting the highest single-day deaths and new cases as it wrestles an aggressive new wave of COVID-19. Health Minister Zweli Mkhize announced that 844 deaths and 21,832 new cases were recorded, the most casualties in the Eastern Cape province. The previous record for single-day deaths was at 572, and that was recorded in July. The country has so far recorded 31,368 deaths since the pandemic hit, out of a total of more than 1.1 million confirmed cases. And then we come closer home in Uganda, and a Ugandan policeman is being held at a police station after allegedly firing a live bullet at the convoy of presidential candidate Patrick Amuriat on Wednesday in the western Katwagenda district. Police say the arrested officer was not assigned to follow Mr. Amuriat in the campaign trail, the Daily Monitor newspaper has reported. Local television channel NTV has tweeted photos showing the aftermath of the incident. Now, Ugandans will next Thursday vote for a new parliament, and President Yoweri Museveni will be seeking a sixth term in office. Ugandans will be voting for a new parliament and also a president. And United Nations human rights experts have accused security forces of using excessive force during political protests and rallies. Last month, the bodyguard of another opposition presidential candidate, the pop star Bobi Wine, was killed when he was ran over by a vehicle belonging to the military police. And then we head over to Cameroon, and 4 soldiers and government officials have been killed in Cameroon's northwest region after their vehicle hit an improvised explosive device, officials have confirmed. The 5 were traveling in a military convoy when the blast occurred on the road leading to the town of Mbwengi, about 450 kilometers from the capital Yaoundé, Reuters news agency has reported. No group has said it carried out the attack, but the government has blamed armed secessionists from the Anglophone region. And then we end with Sudan, and the US has agreed to give Sudan a bridge, a short-term loan of about $1.2 billion to help it clear its arrears with the World Bank. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin has said. He made the announcement following his first visit to Sudan since the U.S. removed it from its list of state sponsors of terrorism last month. Mr. Mnuchin met Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and General Abdel Fattah Abdurrahman Burhan, who were in power-sharing deal since long-serving ruler Omar al-Bashir was ousted in 2019. Mr. Mnuchin treated that he had signed a memorandum of understanding with the government to provide a bridge loan that will enable Sudan to clear its approximately $1.2 billion US arrears to the World Bank once the agreed conditions are met. And perhaps you're wondering, what are some of these agreed conditions? And I think there's more to this story about this new love affair between the outgoing administration in the US and Sudan there. I think Sudan has been seeking to be removed from that list of countries that are supporting terrorism across the world. Remember, Sudan was put on that list in the early 90s after it was discovered that it had offered a safe haven to Osama bin Laden there in Sudan, and so that made Sudan be put in the list of the countries that support terrorism across the world, and that really did hurt Sudan in many ways. But after the new administration came into being, after the ousting of Omar al-Bashir, we've seen Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok trying to seek for diplomatic ties with other countries that did not have the ties were severed nevertheless, and Sudan has been keen in being in the good books of the US, and so Trump removed Sudan in that list after I think Sudan promised to meet one of the key demands that the US had was for Sudan to take care of to pay the victims of the 1998 bombings that happened in the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi here in Kenya, and also in Dar es Salaam. Remember, it claimed a lot of lives, and so that was one of the conditions among others. So these others are the ones perhaps we should find time and look at and see what really does the U.S. Stand to gain at this, because the U.S. foreign policy usually it's quite something there, and as we've been seeing, Donald Trump. It's quite interesting, because this is something that the rest of administrations were not very keen to do, but also understandably, because then Omar al-Bashir was still in power. And remember, Omar al-Bashir right now is serving a term in jail over corruption and money laundering, but also he has a warrant of arrest from the ICC that I think is also one of the key conditions that perhaps the US is demanding that Sudan is able to meet, take him to the ICC so that these other sanctions could be lifted against Sudan. I don't know if that is something that they'll be keen to do, especially the ICC. And we talk about this all the time, because that will mean if Omar al-Bashir will be taken to the ICC in regards to the killings and the human rights abuses in Darfur, then that will mean a lot of these generals that we see being part of the leadership today of Sudan will have to follow there, because they were part of the people who executed and were part of these killings and abuse of human rights there. So that might be a tricky balance there for especially the army officials right now, who majority of them are still in the part of the transitional government, the military side. But we know the protesters side, led by Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, have been asking, have intimated, have said before, have shown, a commitment on their side that they would want to have Omar al-Bashir to go answer to some of these charges, or these charges are the ICC, but that has not been able to happen. And so that was one of the key conditions that the U.S. had asked for, but we see after Sudan committed to paying the victims of the 1998 bombings, and that is when Trump removed Sudan from that list. But the question is, can Sudan afford to actually pay these victims? Was it about over 365? I'm not quite sure, but over 300 million US dollars. Can Sudan afford to pay this money to the victims of, the bombings there? And the answer is probably no. It might, but it might take forever, because Sudan is not in a very good financial status right now. Remember, when you are, blacklisted as a country that sponsors terrorism, that comes with a hefty price there in terms of sanctions that go directly to affect your economy. So Sudan has been reeling from years of bad economy that we saw catapult, and became one of the reasons why, Omar al-Bashir was removed from office after life became unbearable there for a lot of Sudanese. So, long story short, let's see how this will play out. And because Sudan agreed to pay this money to the victims, and now the U.S. is coming in and giving it a short-term loan of $1.2 billion to help it clear its arrears with the World Bank. So the same U.S. that put up a condition and said, Sudan, if you want us to remove you from the list of the countries that are supporting terrorism, then you have to agree to pay, to compensate the victims of that fateful bombing in 1998. At the same time, they know they're the ones who are loaning Sudan the money to help it clear its debt in the World Bank. It's quite something there. So obviously Sudan is not able to afford the compensation money. So I don't know who will give Sudan some money there. Sudan during when Omar al-Bashir was in power, was a very good friend with with Saudi Arabia and other UAE and other countries there in the Arab League. But in the events that culminated to President Omar al-Bashir being removed from power, these countries turned against him, and it is said that one of his intelligence, one of the ministers then in Sudan that was quite powerful, and I think he held the docket of intelligence, if I'm not very wrong, was very close to Omar al-Bashir, but also was very close to a country like Saudi Arabia. So this guy apparently used to be a double agent. He would come and advise President Omar al-Bashir and tell him this and this, and this is what you need to do, and this is what the intelligence is all about, and this is how you need to act, and this is what is happening in the country. And at the same time, he would use the same intelligence to go and feed and snitch on Omar al-Bashir outside. And so we saw after, and really Omar al-Bashir really trusted this guy. And after Omar al-Bashir, he came to know of this guy had left the country and went to Saudi Arabia. And guess what? When he went to Saudi Arabia, he was given a nationality there in Saudi Arabia. All right, because he was working on behalf of Saudi government, but he was working, he was a minister in Omar al-Bashir's government. So after that, during those days where it was eminent Omar al-Bashir was going to be toppled, guess who Saudi Arabia, they sent an envoy, and guess who was part of that envoy? A former Sudanese citizen who had now been given a Saudi nationality. It was part of the envoy. Now they were coming to negotiate and mediate in the peace process in Sudan. I know it does not make any sense, but hey, I'm telling you. So let's see how this will work out. And I think a few minutes before coming here, I was watching some news there on Al Jazeera. Remember, other Arab countries had decided to sever ties with Qatar because they're saying Qatar is the main sponsor of terrorism, and also Qatar is interfering with their own internal politics in the different countries. And this was led by, of course, Saudi Arabia, and it has this feud has lasted as long as over 3 years now, and so they're saying they want to come back again and have build the diplomatic ties again between Qatar and these other countries. And we know during that time Sudan was caught up in the feud between these Arab countries, and so it was forced to choose a side. So after Sudan refused to cut ties with Qatar, that's when I think Saudi Arabia went around it and were part of actually the people who funded the toppling of Omar al-Bashir. Too much information. Yeah, but quite interesting there. So that loan that the U.S. has offered to Sudan, hopefully it will help it a long way. But I just want to know, what is it? What is it for the U.S.? What is in it for it? Because the U.S., they just don't do things for the sake of doing it. And we know this administration, how they've been known to do things. So let's just see how that will work out for Sudan. But I know, of course, they're happy that they're not in that list of countries that sponsor terrorism. Another place that a crisis is looming is in the Central African Republic, which has forced Pope Francis to come out to speak about what is happening in the Central African Republic. And he's now urging the people of the country to refrain from violence after the deeply troubled country staged disputed elections. I think this was expected, and before we took a break, the Christmas break, I think it was eminent. So far there's not been a lot of violence there, but of course tensions arrive, and we've seen 10 candidates from the opposition come together and say this election was littered with numerous irregularities, and you want it annulled, especially the presidential result. Then it was not credible, and a lot of people who were supposed to vote were not able to vote because a lot of polling stations were closed down. And this Makiu was in the opposition stronghold, where also a lot of insecurity has been being reported lately. Central African Republic is reeling from years of civil unrest, and we know by returning of a former president, Francois Bozize, also really elicited a lot of feelings there, and he was able to bring opposition under one umbrella, although he was barred from running on the elections. But he was able, after him being barred from running, from contesting the elections, that is when there was the spate of violence now intensified. And if you know the history of Francois Bozize, he has been part of, and the reason as to why and contributed immensely, his presence there and his politics, to the insecurity and instability of in the Central African Republic. And he's run out of the country twice seeking asylum, and the last one he had ran to Cameroon, and Paul Biya was giving him a shelter there after he was removed, toppled from power. And you remember, he came to power through a coup also, and he was removed. And before he was able to succeed, that I think was his third or second coup, because he had attempted another coup in the 80s and several and failed. So was it in 2003 there he succeeded, and then in 2012 I think he was removed and he ran away. He went to Cameroon, and President Paul Biya was offering him the asylum. I'm not surprised, because President Paul Biya is just, I mean, I don't know, and we've seen what has been happening there in Cameroon, a lot of killings and maiming especially, and of course the conflict between the government and the Anglophone continues there. So it's quite interesting. So this other story that in line with what is happening in the United States, Somali American Congresswoman Ilhan Omar now is the one who is planning to initiate a process of impeaching U.S. President Donald Trump. I'm telling you, Trump is not very happy about this, and as we speak right now, Twitter suspended his account for about 12 hours. It was blocked. You can't retweet, you can't comment, you can't they have deactivated his account. He's in act, so you can't really engage with him. So he has been blocked on Twitter for 12 hours, and Facebook has blocked him for 24 hours. Can you imagine if this was your president? He's done something so grievous that social media site blocks him. This is just this is not good at all. But of course, a statement he released a couple of hours ago through one of his officials there in White House. Remember, his account has been suspended, has been blocked for about 12 hours on Twitter, and he said that now he's willing and he will ensure that there will be a peaceful transfer of power after all that nonsense that we saw yesterday happen on Capitol Hill. Quite disheartening. What you think is the heart of democracy in the world and the free world and whatnot and the older democracy, and you think they know better. But I'm surprised, and it was quite unfortunate what was happening there. And of course, a lot of leaders across the world have commented and have called out Trump for inciting that violence, because that is what he did after that rally he had in Washington, and implored his supporters to walk down to Pennsylvania Avenue and go to Capitol Hill and try to have those the Congress turn the votes, or the Electoral College votes to favor him, something that is impossible. So that tells you, hey, it's just the level of idiocy there that really is astounding. But hey, who are we to speak? You come back here in Africa and we have more problems. And it's unfortunate, because that is where we normally look at. A lot of people, a lot of countries, especially from the third world, we look at the US and we think, okay, this is Big Brother now. If the Big Brother is so confused and all messed up, and then you wonder, where does that leave the fragile democracies that we have here in the continent? And earlier on, we were having this conversation. But I think the good thing with the US is they have a very strong institutions. So perhaps that was able to save the day. Otherwise, if that was here in the continent, people just do whatever they want. We've seen that happen last year. A lot of leaders running against what was already stipulated in the Constitution. They disregarded the Constitution, they amended the Constitution, they mutilated the Constitution, they had a constitutional coup and went ahead and did whatever they wanted to do anyway. But I think that's the difference between Africa and the US, because the US, they have better institutions. So if we can have that, then perhaps that will work out for us, even as the scuffles in the Ghana's newly elected members of Parliament, yesterday in Parliament, also quite disheartening. Remember, the opposition in Ghana are still crying foul, and they're saying the elections that saw the incumbent retain his seat, Nana Akufo-Addo. They're saying they're mad with a lot of corruption and irregularities, and Mahama's side has not accepted that President Akufo-Addo retained his seat, free and fairly. So also elections there have been contested. Very well. Thank you so much for your time. This has been Diaspora at Dispatches. I am Miriam Ogutu. A very good afternoon.
Peace must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.